It's important to recognize our ability to choose our behaviors, no matter how old we are, from being very young children well into our seasoned adult life. This is the challenge we face daily, choosing behaviors that lead to success. When I'm working with people, we process this idea through a flowchart. Every day we are dealing with different events and interactions throughout the day. Very simple, regular things that happen all the time, as well as larger, more challenging interactions and events. These events and interactions stir feelings. The feelings that a particular event might stir for one person may be very different than the feelings they stir for somebody else. But it is the combination of the events and interactions along with the feelings that have now started to brew that take us into choosing our behavior. When we choose a behavior, we either head down a path that is a helping path or a hurting path. The helping path leads to success and stirs some positive energy that comes back and takes the feeling we had and lifts it to an even better place. A hurting path brews all kinds of negativity and comes back to feed the original feeling in a way that brings it down, perhaps in a way that's much more destructive than it was to begin with. And so we find ourselves in these loops or patterns depending on our the choice that we're making with the combination of the event we're experiencing and the feelings that have come with it. To be successful in choosing successful behaviors, behaviors that are helping behaviors, there are things we can do to be more aware of this process and how it's impacting us and in our relationships with others. We can start to pay attention to the events and interactions that are triggers. The events and interactions that are particularly challenging to us. Perhaps the people that perhaps we spend time with that are very difficult for us to spend time around. The outcomes that we aren't enjoying, the outcomes that don't really represent us the way that we would like. We can kind of go backwards and say, well, how did I end up with this negative outcome? What happened and where did it start? So we start to notice more fully those triggers. Trigger events and trigger interactions usually come with some warning feelings. Now, again, these warning feelings may be different for different people, but some common ones would be anger, resentment, fear, as well as feelings of hopeless and helpless. When these feelings are starting to shape or stir within us, then that's a really good warning that we are now going to be particularly challenged in choosing a successful behavior. So when we notice that those feelings are occurring, either one or more of them, there's an important tip we can keep in mind. And that tip is that our first reaction is almost always going to be wrong. And that allows us, again, to, if we're able to actually have this self-talk, this dialogue as we're going through this process, and we're able to remind ourselves that our first reaction is probably wrong, then we can give ourselves a first step toward this helping behavior by pausing. That pause is already a step towards a helping behavior. To define behaviors, behaviors are the words we use, the words we speak, the actions we choose, and the attitudes that we present. All of these things represent our behaviors. So when we start to recognize that we own this process, that we ultimately get to have power and influence and decide whether we're going to end up in a helping loop or a hurting loop, then we're able to look back after something has occurred, after a decision has been made, and really reflect. Did that decision, did that choice, did that behavior represent me? Other people can put out their behaviors all day long, and they can be negative, and they can be ugly, and they can be frustrating. Those behaviors represent them. Our response to them, our choices, our behaviors represent us. So we can't continue to ride on this idea of we're justified because of the choice the other person made. We have to take full accountability for the choice that we make. An example of this that comes to mind would be the event of driving and the interaction. Many people get into their cars and they feel they have now entered into a war zone. And their feelings are feelings of they're very resentful. They feel that everything is very intentional. Anybody who's not using their blinker appropriately or driving at the right speed is a personal attack on them. And they have all these ugly feelings stirred, and their reactions tend to be down this hurting loop. And it can be not just difficult to ride in a car with somebody like that, but it can be dangerous to be on the road with them in any way. I learned from my mother that this event, this interaction, doesn't have to have that negative loop. It was on many occasions where we would be in the car and another car would do something that seemed a little frustrating, perhaps even dangerous. My mom may have had to slam on her brakes in order to not hit the car in front of us. And the types of words she would choose were words along the lines of, "Thank goodness we were able to stop in time. Thank goodness everybody is safe. What a blessing that we were the ones behind them so that we didn't have to have an accident today." And that really changes people. That brings a whole different energy into a car and a whole new perspective to that entire experience. These events and these interactions definitely will continue to be challenging. There will be some that are just daily things that we deal with, like getting up in the morning. That's an event. And we can start to tweak even those little mundane adventures into something that has more of a positive loop in our life. If we tend to have these ugly exchanges in the morning and all this negativity where everybody goes their separate ways feeling a lot of angst towards each other, we can start to examine at what point this might be switched into a different loop. What charge do we have, at least to impact our role in that? Because we choose a helping path does not mean that all of a sudden we are going to always see roses and lovely outcomes as a result. Particularly in parenting, we might do things exactly right, and it doesn't mean that our children are going to always do the same. So it doesn't become so much, we don't measure the success of our day on how ideal our children behaved. We measure the success of our day on how well we responded to those challenges. A great day, you might decide you had a great day even though your children broke a lot of rules because you chose to respond to them in a very loving but firm, matter-of-fact way where there were consequences, but they weren't fueled with rage and anger. They were fueled by intention and contemplation and direction. So this is just a piece of understanding ourselves and understanding the power that we have to choose our behaviors. And when we understand that power and make the most of it, we are definitely headed in a pattern that represents ourselves well and will ultimately lead to success in our relationships, particularly, as well as professionally, spiritually, and in all areas of our life.